Evelyn Thompson, a 68-year-old custodian at Crestview Technologies, pushed her cleaning cart down the lengthy corridor, her movements slow yet purposeful. For over 40 years, she had walked these halls, silently ensuring the company's cleanliness and order. To many, she was little more than a shadow, appearing only when there was a mess to clean. However, today would be different. An unexpected confrontation was about to disrupt her routine and unveil the dark side of corporate culture. How would one woman's humiliation ignite a spark for change in the corporate environment? Before we explore this transformative journey, take a moment to share where you're watching from in the comments. And if you find this uplifting story compelling, remember to hit that subscribe button. As Evelyn made her way towards the executive offices, her thoughts wandered to her grandchildren. The weight of responsibility rested heavily on her, a burden she had never anticipated bearing at this stage in life. The tragic loss of her daughter 2 years ago left an aching void and 3 young children to care for. Each ache in her joints and every twinge in her back served as a reminder of why she couldn't retire, why she pressed on through each day despite her doctor's warnings. "Good morning, Ms. Thompson," a cheerful voice called, interrupting her thoughts. Evelyn looked up to see Tom Harris, a young accountant, beaming at her. Unlike most employees who barely acknowledged her presence, Tom always took a moment to greet her. "Good morning, Mr. Harris," she replied, her voice warm despite her fatigue. "How are you today?" "I'm doing well, thank you. How are the grandchildren?" A rare smile appeared on Evelyn's face, momentarily lifting her weariness. "They're growing fast, keeping me busy, that's for sure." Tom nodded, his eyes reflecting genuine interest. "I'm sure they appreciate everything you do for them. You're an inspiration, Ms. Thompson." Before Evelyn could respond, a sharp voice sliced through the air. "Harris, don't you have better things to do than waste time with the help?" Victor Kingston, the department manager, strode toward them, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. His lips curled into a sneer as his cold gaze swept over Evelyn, landing on Tom. Tom quickly straightened, his friendly demeanor replaced by professional detachment. "Of course, Mr. Kingston. I was just heading to my desk." As Tom hurried away, Victor turned his attention to Evelyn. "Make sure you clean properly today. I'm tired of seeing dust in the corners." Evelyn lowered her gaze, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, Mr. Kingston, I'll do my best." Victor scoffed and walked off, leaving Evelyn alone once more. She took a deep breath, bracing herself against the familiar sting of his words. This wasn't the first time Victor had spoken to her like this, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. As she resumed her work, Evelyn reflected on how things had changed over the years. When she first joined Crestview, the company felt like a second home. Colleagues were friendly, and management recognized her hard work. However, as the older staff retired and new faces emerged, the atmosphere shifted. Victor Kingston epitomized this change. He'd climbed the corporate ladder with ruthless efficiency, stepping on anyone he considered beneath him. To Victor, Evelyn was merely a nuisance, a relic of the old ways. Unbeknownst to her, Evelyn's quiet strength in the face of Victor's cruelty had caught the attention of Tom Harris. He had been observing their interactions for months, feeling a mix of anger and guilt with each exchange. Fresh out of college and eager to make his mark, Tom had quickly learned to keep his head down, especially around Victor, whose reputation for belittling employees was well known. As Evelyn continued her work, she felt the weight of the corporate world bearing down on her. But little did she know, this day would ignite a spark for change, setting in motion a series of events that would alter the very fabric of Crestview Technologies. The issues of bias against minority backgrounds were well known in the office. As David settled into his cubicle, he couldn't shake the image of Evelyn's resigned expression. He had witnessed Victor's behavior countless times, each incident eroding his resolve to speak up. The fear of losing his job and jeopardizing his budding career always held him back. If only I had the courage to stand up for her, David thought, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. But what would it matter? Victor's too well connected. He'd probably find a way to fire me anyway. Across the office, Victor Kingston sat in his corner office, a smug smile on his face as he surveyed his domain. At 45, he considered himself to have reached the pinnacle of success, power over others. His insecurities, rooted in a mediocre childhood, drove him to assert dominance at every opportunity. Victor's gaze narrowed as he spotted Evelyn through the glass walls of his office. The sight of her bent figure scrubbing the baseboards ignited a familiar spark of contempt within him. To Victor, Evelyn embodied everything he despised: the old guard, the working class, and the minorities he believed were holding the company back. Time to remind that old woman of her place, Victor muttered to himself, rising from his leather chair and striding toward the restroom where Evelyn was working. These moments, where he could exert his authority without consequence, were what he lived for. Little did he know this confrontation would trigger a chain of events that would change everything. Evelyn was on her knees scrubbing a stubborn stain on the bathroom floor when she heard the door swing open. The sharp tap of expensive shoes on tile made her heart sink. She didn't need to look up to know who had entered. Well, 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 Victor's voice dripped with disdain. If it isn't our resident fossil. Tell me, Thompson, do you actually clean anything, or do you just shuffle around pretending to work? Evelyn slowly rose to her feet, her joints protesting the movement. She kept her eyes lowered, focusing on the mop in her hands. "I'm doing my best, Mr. Kingston," she replied softly. Victor scoffed and stepped closer, the smell of his expensive cologne mixing with the harsh scent of cleaning products, creating a nauseating blend. "Your best? Is that what you call this pitiful excuse for work? I've seen cleaner gas station bathrooms." His words cut deep, each syllable a reminder of her perceived worthlessness in his eyes. Evelyn's hands trembled slightly as she gripped the mop handle tighter, using it as an anchor against Victor's tirade. "You know, Thompson," he continued mockingly, "I've been wondering how it feels to be so obsolete. Let's face it, you're well past your expiration date. The only reason you're still here is that no one else wants to do this menial job." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. She had endured Victor's verbal abuse before, but never with such viciousness. Each word was carefully chosen to inflict maximum damage and chip away at her already fragile self-esteem. "I've been with the company for over 40 years, Mr. Kingston," Evelyn managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. "I take pride in my work." Victor laughed, the sound echoing harshly off the tiled walls. "Pride in what? Pushing a mop around? Face it, Thompson, you're nothing but a relic, a bygone era that should have been phased out long ago. You're lucky we even keep you around. God knows why. You can't keep up with this job anymore." As Victor's verbal assault continued, neither he nor Evelyn noticed a slight movement behind one of the stall doors. David Anderson, who had entered the restroom moments earlier, sat frozen on the toilet seat, his heart pounding. He had come in seeking a brief escape from the stress of the workday, never expecting to witness such cruelty. Through the gap in the stall door, David saw Evelyn's hunched figure, her shoulders shaking slightly as she absorbed Victor's abuse. He watched in horror as Victor stepped even closer, invading her personal space. "You know what your problem is, Thompson?" Victor sneered, his face just inches from hers. "You don't know when to quit. You're too stupid or too stubborn to realize you're not wanted here. Your kind doesn't belong in a modern workplace like this." The racial undertones in Victor's statement were unmistakable, and David felt a wave of nausea wash over him. He wanted to burst out of the stall to confront Victor and defend Evelyn, but fear kept him rooted in place. His mind raced with the potential consequences: losing his job, being blacklisted in the industry, unable to support his family. Evelyn, her voice trembling, tried one last time to stand her ground. "Mr. Kingston, I've always done my job to the best of my ability. I've never given anyone cause to complain about my work." Victor's eyes flashed dangerously. "Your ability? Let me tell you something about your ability, you old crow. Your best isn't good enough. It never was, and it never will be. You're a disgrace to this company, and every day I have to look at you reminds me of how far we still have to go to weed out the dead weight." With that final jab, Victor turned on his heel and stormed out, leaving Evelyn alone, or so she thought. As soon as the door slammed shut, Evelyn's composure crumbled. She leaned against the wall, slid slowly to the floor, and began to sob quietly. David, still hidden in the stall, felt his heart break. The sound of her muffled cries echoed in the small space, each sob a damning indictment of his own cowardice. He wanted to comfort her, to tell her she didn't deserve such treatment, but fear of discovery kept him silent. After what felt like an eternity, Evelyn's sobs subsided. David heard the rustle of movement, the squeak of the mop bucket's wheels, and then the soft click of the bathroom door as Evelyn left. Only then did he emerge from his hiding place, his face pale and hands shaking as he stared at his reflection in the mirror. He hardly recognized himself. The person looking back seemed smaller, diminished by his failure to act. He splashed cold water on his face, trying to wash away the guilt that clung to him like a second skin. "I should have said something," he whispered to his reflection. "I should have stood up to Victor. What kind of person am I?" Even as he berated himself, David knew tomorrow would likely bring more of the same. He would see Evelyn in the hallways, offer her a kind word or a smile, but ultimately do nothing to change her situation. The realization made him feel hollow inside. As David left the bathroom, he made a silent promise to himself: to be kinder to Evelyn, to show her through small gestures that not everyone in the company shared Victor's views. It wasn't enough, far from it, but it was all he felt capable of doing. Little did he know, this incident would be the first in a series of events that would test his moral fiber and ultimately force him to confront the consequences of his inaction. The stage was set for dramatic upheaval at Hartwell Industries, one that would challenge the status quo and bring long-buried injustices to light. In the days that followed, David became hyper-aware of Evelyn's presence in the office. He noticed how she seemed to shrink into herself whenever Victor was nearby and how her once steady hands now trembled slightly as she went about her work. The guilt gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his failure to intervene. David began to show Evelyn small acts of kindness whenever he could,